Pakistan has reset its election date after the assassination of opposition leader Benazir Bhutto. Voters will now go to the polls February 18th. And opposition parties are furious. They say all the government is really doing is postponing defeat. So let's get some perspective now on this developing story. Aisha Ijaz Khan knows Pakistan well. She was born there and later practiced law there. She now lives in London, where she's a political commentator. So, Aisha, we just heard from President Musharraf. One of the things he announced is the fact that Scotland Yard will assist Pakistan in its investigation of the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. How far does that go towards satisfying the calls from many for some sort of international investigation into Bhutto's death?
Well, that was a welcome thing that he said, perhaps the only thing in his entire speech that I thought was conciliatory, because as you know, the Pakistan People's Party, which was Bhutto's party, has been calling for an international investigation. This is not really an international investigation that he's agreed to, but basically he's agreed to international expertise. So that's one good thing. But as far as the rest of his speech goes, I would just like to say that in spite of all the turmoil that Pakistan has seen this year and the continuing erosion of the Musharraf government's popularity and its credibility, he still has not learned that you cannot achieve political reconciliation through force. He's talked about beefing up force in Pakistan, especially in the Sindh province. This is going to be nationally divisive. It's not going to achieve anything conciliatory. He needs to compromise. He is in no position to dictate terms at this moment. But he's, in his speech, telling the media what to cover and what not to cover. He's even telling people how to think. I was just, it was like a worst fear come true, this speech.
So the fact that, as you say, he has definitely taken a hard line on things, saying that the situation, the unrest of recent days is intolerable, that the army will certainly be deployed to, in his words, keep the peace. How credible is his assertion that the unrest has caused a huge amount of damage, has in some ways, in some parts of the countries, incapacitated the election commission, so it would be impossible to proceed with elections as scheduled?
Well, there is truth in his observations in terms of the damage and destruction that's been caused in Pakistan in the aftermath of Ms. Bhutto's assassination. However, the questions people in Pakistan are asking are, first of all, when there was a peaceful lawyers' movement earlier this year, the police was very quick to crack down on them. They took peacefully protesting lawyers off the streets immediately, put them in house arrest, put them in jails in scores. Yet when these miscreants were creating all this damage, burning banks, looting, the police was on a back foot. And also, after Ms. Bhutto's assassination, the army should have preempted the fact that there was going to be huge unrest in the streets, and they should have been deployed there beforehand so that the damage could have been minimal and elections could have been held on target, on schedule.
We know that opposition parties have already denounced the decision by the Election Commission to postpone the vote until February 18th. How would you expect them to respond to the tone and substance of what we heard from President Musharraf?
Well, as you said, his tone was very hardline, and this is not going to help anything. His position is very weak. He's got a huge credibility deficit in the nation. Nobody believes what he says or government ministers say. The opposition is in a strong position, so he's using a last-ditch effort to remain in power by having the army assist him. That's a mistake, I think, even on the army's part, to continue to prop him up, because he's really not popular in Pakistan, and the opposition is probably going to do whatever they can to agitate in the streets. This is going to mean clashes potentially between the Pakistan army and civilians, which is a terrible thing. And also, I don't know to what extent they will be able to control further violence in this kind of situation. And in addition, I think the only people who will gain from this are the extremists, when they will see moderate forces within the country or secular forces within the country clashing amongst each other. The only people who will gain from this are the extremists. So Musharraf's entire agenda about fighting extremism, one really questions whether he knows how to do it.
You know, you just outline a very ominous scenario for the near future. In your view, is it possible come February 18th to have transparent, free, fair, and in Musharraf's words today, peaceful elections?
Well, no, none of the opposition parties thought, or average people for that matter, that the government is interested in having free, fair and transparent elections. There was a lot of pressure on them to do that, but they were being very stubborn about it. What happened, and that's why a lot of parties were calling for a boycott. They were also calling for a boycott so that the judiciary could be restored. That was one of their demands, the judiciary that was deposed so ruthlessly earlier this year. But what happened in the aftermath of Ms. Bhutto's assassination was that the government's popularity took a further absolute nosedive. And so the opposition parties thought that if we go right ahead with elections, even if the government tries to rig them, or if they're not free, fair and transparent, the government's popularity is so low that they won't be able to go through with a huge rigging plan. In fact, they couldn't even find polling agents who would represent the Q League, which is Musharraf's party. And that's the reason I think essentially they have decided to postpone elections. Yes, there has been a lot of anger on Pakistan's streets, and there has been a lot of damage and destruction. And to some extent, I do blame the opposition parties for that as well, in particular the Pakistan People's Party. I think their leadership has shown a certain degree of lack of responsibility. They should have tried to tell their party workers that this is not the way to express your anger. But at the same time, one has to question the government's motives as well, because this is something in Pakistan one can preempt this kind of situation. You can deploy the army beforehand if you're really serious about minimizing violence.
We'll continue to watch all developments closely, as I'm sure you will. Aisha Ijaz Khan, good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.